that's the pawpaw. And he found a really interesting use because one time his goats got out. He had the goats grazing another patch. Figured, as most people with goats would, that those goats were going to chomp on anything possible in their sight. So kept them out of the pawpaw patch. But of course, the goats, being mischievous and interested, hopped that fence and then proceeded to graze everything but the pawpaw. And so he found this really nice synergistic relationship. And does anyone know why those goats don't eat the pawpaw? Good luck. So there's actually a toxin in the leaves that the plant develops as a way to deter herbivores from grazing on it. And this will deter everything from deer to goats. So pawpaw is a really nice deer-resistant or deer-proof plant as well. And the pawpaw is actually the only host plant for the zebra swallowtail butterfly. And if you know anything about swallowtails, those butterflies have a toxicity, which helps protect them from birds. Well, look at the toxicity because when they're caterpillars, they eat pawpaw leaves. Okay? And so he didn't know that, but again, he kind of stumbled upon it, and now he has this nice double stacked system here where he can graze the goats, they keep the understory nice and clean, and he can harvest his
Is it a
pawpaws.
terpene? The terpene that they develop, the butterflies?
I'm not sure the exact compound of the butterfly. So you can see here, this is a wild patch, and pawpaw likes to grow in these thickets of trees. Some of the wild ones tend to be kind of small, some of them have a lot of variation. So what he's done over the years is thin them out a little bit, and he's also grafted against selected varieties onto these trees. So he's kind of this interesting mix in his orchard of grafted and sort of wild pawpaws. Now, one of the problems with pawpaw, and one of the reasons it's not on everyone's shelf and you can't get it in the grocery store, is because they're best ripened on the tree. So they kind of start to brown up like a banana when it's a little past ripe. They start to get kind of mushy. So if you were to harvest a bunch of those and pack them in a box and send them on their way on a truck, you would end up with applesauce essentially on the other end. And so they've worked really hard to sell as many fresh pawpaws as they can, but they also mainly pit and process and sell frozen pawpaw pulp. Try to say that 10 times fast. Pawpaw pulp. To sell his pawpaws, he created the Ohio Pawpaw Festival to celebrate the heritage. Here's some of the logos from past ones. This is this year's logo, again with the zebra swallowtail caterpillar, kind of with this Alice in Wonderland kind of theme going on. Lots of fun, about 1,000 people go every year. About 3 years ago, I believe it was, one of the senators in Ohio came and declared pawpaw the state fruit, right? So we really like this as a case study because he is putting his work in, he's figuring out how to sell his crop, but he's also creating a whole culture around this fruit, right, and reviving that as a really exciting piece. And probably the Pawpaw Festival is the only place that you can meet a real live pawpaw that's your size. So there's your real life human scale pawpaw. There's the best pawpaw art, and of course there's a pawpaw eating contest where no hands are allowed. So smash your face right into those nice ripe fruits. There's also a tasting of all the different pawpaws that are out there, and it's interesting to note the variation in color. Here's one that's almost completely white. There's ones up here that are paler yellow, and then we have almost like a macaroni and cheese, like Kraft macaroni and cheese kind of orange, like really bright and vibrant. And so they all taste quite different. The lighter ones tend to be more like avocados. These tend to be a lot more vanilla flavor, more floral, and these tend to be more like mango. So quite a nice treat to see the variation there. It's really hard to do a taste test because they all taste amazing.
Wait a minute. When Steve says he really likes pawpaws, this is what he means.
Yeah, so at the festival they also had 8 different breweries brewing pawpaw beer, which was a fun thing to taste as well, of course. I have to say though that the pawpaw beers where the pawpaw was like right up front actually weren't that good. I'm not a big fruity beer fan, but this one was, the pawpaw was used more as a sort of subtle flavor. So, one more case study, moving further west into Minnesota. This is my sort of American Gothic shot of these two guys. This is a father-son team, the Rudders, that are up in Minnesota. And it really gives, again, some sense of what we're talking about when we think about something that McDaniels was out to do, which is breeding a nut crop, breeding a crop that takes decades in order for the plant to mature, to fruit, and then to do genetic selection. So Phil Rudder has been doing this for about 40 years, and he plans to do it until he can no longer. And he doesn't expect to have really good selected varieties in his lifetime. He's passing that on to his son, who's going to be carrying on the work and hopefully naming varieties. So he says, maybe I'll name a variety of nut before I die, but it's not likely. So they're really committed to the long term. It was a real pleasure to go to his place last fall as well and visit. This is his hazelnut grove. They've planted basically 70 acres full of nut trees. They have a number for each one of them, and they're keeping like insane amounts of data on all of these different trees. And they're selecting for things like production, resistance to disease, flavor, taste, all those different types of things. This is about a 12-year-old planting, and they were planning the next year to coppice this. Hazelnuts usually let them grow nice and tall, and then this is a little taller than you'd even want for harvesting. You can see it's a little over his head, and so we can cut him back and then re-harvest again. He showed me some pictures of root systems, so he's really interested in hazelnuts also as a carbon sequestering crop. The root systems for one plant can be 30 feet wide, right? Just massive fibrous root systems. They're also working a lot with chestnut. If you know anything about the story of the American chestnut, the chestnut was hit by a blight of fungus in the early 1900s, which spread, and it was one of the most rapid demises of any tree species on our continent. You can see it here, kind of splitting apart this chestnut. But unlike most people who would scoff and run in terror with this chestnut blight being here, the Rudders actually welcome it in, because what they want to see is how their trees adapt and survive. And if anything, the success is the proof in the pudding. Again, I went on one of the best nut producing years. There was just food literally everywhere, dropping all over the place. And so here's some of their American chestnuts doing quite well despite having blight.
Can you predict when the years are going to be good?
So nut masting is really a challenging thing to predict, and lots of people have tried, but it seems like every time you think you got it, you'll change it.
But Steve did say that last year was the banner year. We never had such a crop. Well, this year, like January's nut growth, not a single hickory nut, nothing. So, it's lots and nothing. It probably, I would predict it's going to come back about intermediate next year, but who knows?
So one of the interesting things he does, a lot of work in American chestnut right now is focused on breeding the perfect, complete pure American chestnut, no other sort of genetics. This grove of chestnuts, which is several acres, has American, Chinese, Japanese, and European chestnuts, all growing together. This is a strategy that they're employing based off of a concept in ecology called a hybrid swarm. The way these pollinate and cross their pollen is through the air, right? And so if you plant a bunch of trees really densely together, they send out their pollen, and they're going to naturally cross-pollinate and hybridize. And then the seed that you get off of that is going to have some various characteristics of those plants playing it out. And it's a really powerful testament to how we could perceive our role in being forest farmers, right? Are we here to orchestrate and let the trees figure it out, or are we going to try to intervene and do everything ourselves, right? And so this is a big departure, and there's some good successes initially from this work, although it does take decades and decades of time. You can see here also a little bit of paddy here. So this is their horse grazing pasture. So lots of chance for integration as well. They also have their sheep come through and mow everything down right before nut harvest, because usually you're scooping those nuts off under the ground. So there's some interesting things here. If they really were to, they're obviously focused entirely on nuts. This grove also is ready to be thinned. You can see it's quite dense, and all of these logs would be perfect mushroom logs for shiitakes, right? And so ways to stack these systems is something that we're interested in thinking about, although they're pretty focused on nuts, and I don't think we're going to get them to grow mushrooms anytime soon. Speaking of which,
Very good.
mushrooms.
Mushrooms is sort of my specialty.